This is taken from one of 6 essays written for Sewanee Review from 1913 to 1915 by Ambrose Robert Height Ranson, born 1831, died 1919, about his growing up years living at his family home Gap View and his experiences during the Civil War as a Confederate officer. His observations are very informative about daily life pre-war amid unacceptable observations condoning the enslavement of other human beings. His account is still important in its rendering of daily work on a farm in the 1840s and 50s in Jefferson County, Virginia, one of the most agricultural counties in the Virginias. These conditions were substantially different in the northern Shenandoah Valley when compared to the brutal monocultures in the Deep South. Enslavement in Jefferson County, based on writings of those, white and black, who lived here then, was one of diverse work, the pervasive fear of being sold south, pockets of profound cruelty, and the tantalizing nearness of the option of escaping to freedom. My father had a Negro whom he trusted fully. There was a wedding in our neighborhood at Beddington, the home of the Bettingers, and my sister was bridesmaid to her cousin. In those days, a house party was arranged in much more simple fashion than now. The houses had few rooms, but generally very large ones, and all the bridesmaids were quartered in one room. At this wedding there was a girl from Hoboken, a Miss Stevens, of a wealthy family of that name. When my sister returned home, she did not unpack her trunk until late at night. My father was sitting up reading, and when she entered the room in great distress, holding in her hands Miss Stevens' jewel case, containing such jewels as we had never seen before. It was midnight and very cold, and a heavy snow was falling. My father sent for Frank, his trusted servant, and giving the case into his hands and telling him it was worth more than all he owned, ordered him to get a horse and ride to Beddington, 4 miles distance, and give the case into the hands of Miss Stevens and no one else. Frank made the ride that stormy night and compelled the lady to come down in her night clothes and receive the jewel case and write a letter of acknowledgment. Some careless maid had packed Miss Stevens' jewels in my sister's trunk. Before the railroad was built, Frank drove the wagon of flour to Baltimore, and even after the railroad was built, still Frank went every year before Christmas to Baltimore with a load of flour, bringing back a load which made everybody white and black happy at that festival. He generally arrived after dark, and the big canopied wagon was driven to the front door and left there during the night, the 6 great smoking horses having been led away to the stable. After supper, the wagon was unloaded and the treasures revealed to us, the children. In those days, the factor, or commission merchant, had duties which are unknown now. When he sold the flour, he filled orders for every conceivable want of the family. I met an old factor after I came to Baltimore to live who told me he had, with the assistance of his wife, bought and had made up the entire trousseau of many a bride, besides outfits for the entire families of his friends in the country. The reader can imagine what an event Frank's arrival with his wagon was to us. I have now a handsome service of china, which is brought from Baltimore on Frank's wagon. One Christmas observance the Negroes had which is very peculiar. When the hogs were killed in December, they preserved the bladders, and inflating them and tying the necks tightly to retain the air, they hung them up to dry. And on Christmas morning, while the stars were shining, they laid them on the frozen ground under the windows of the white folks and exploded them by stamping on them, thus awakening the family and saluting them on the arrival of the great festival. I remember part of one of the songs which the ox driver sang in a slow monotone, sitting on the pole of the ox cart and keeping time to the slow swinging steps of the oxen, See the bull go to school, hooey booey, hooey booey. See the bull go to school, hooey booey John. See the bull go to school with his book on his horn. And that is the last of old blind John. See the cow build the mill, hooey booey, hooey booey. See the cow build the mill, hooey booey John. See the cow build the mill, water running up the hill. And that is the last of old blind John. The verses were endless and seemed to have been extemporized as he drove along. The master's part was not difficult. He was kind because kindness paid him well. He took care of his slave because it was money in his pocket to do so, and money out of his pocket if he did not. Of course, there were other and higher motives in individuals, but we must look for a motive for the multitude. That the Negro was better housed, better fed, better clothed, and better looked after in sickness than now was simply because the owner had money at stake. He had warm clothing, plenty of wholesome food, and a good doctor when ill because of that money. In September, the cloth and yarn for his winter clothing was brought home from the factory, and the work of making up began and was only finished at Christmas. At every household there was a woman who could cut out the garments, and all the younger girls had been taught how to sew and knit. During the year, all the girls in clean frocks assembled in some room in the great house every morning, and the class of sewers and knitters was presided over by some spectacled old Negro woman whose word was law to them. The work of making up the clothing and knitting yarn socks went on under her supervision, and at Christmas, every man and woman on the place appeared in new clothes and new shoes and warm woolen stockings. Every man had an overcoat every 4 years and a flannel jacket called by them a warmus to wear under his waistcoat in cold weather. His tobacco was issued to him once a week, and when a boy I loved to be the distributor. Sometimes it was bought in kegs of about 100 pounds and was called blackstrap, and one strap sometimes too was the ration. Some of them chewed it, and some of them smoked it in their corncob pipes when tobacco was raised from the virgin soil. Every year a farmer would clear a small patch of ground sufficient for the wants of his farm and plant it in tobacco. The fragrance of the Negro's corncob pipe was notorious and was due to the fact that no fertilizer had been used in growing his tobacco.